It's funny, isn't it, how some stories just kind of get under our skin, Like Bloody Mary, for instance.
Right.
I mean, come on, who hasn't at least heard of that, right? Tried it at a sleepover, maybe? Dare a friend, even if you were too chicken yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
But there's this thing about whispering her name in the dark, looking in the mirror. It gets to you.
Oh, absolutely. It taps into something primal.
Totally. And that's what we're diving into today.
We are.
It's not just some silly game. Your research, it blew my mind. This legend goes back centuries.
It does. It does. It's centuries old, and it acts as this kind of mirror, I guess you could say, to our own anxieties.
Okay, so your research, I was like swimming in origin stories.
Right.
Scorned woman seeking revenge, even whispers about Queen Mary I.
Yeah.
It's like everyone's got their own version of who Bloody Mary was.
Exactly. And that's what makes folklore so interesting, right? It's this constantly evolving thing. The fact that there's no one definitive answer, it makes it even more powerful because we get to fill in the gaps.
That is a really good point. It's like a choose-your-own-adventure fear.
Exactly. Exactly.
And speaking of those gaps, I noticed your research also, it had all these little variations in the ritual.
Right. Yeah.
Candles, no candles, 3 whispers, 7 whispers.
Right.
It's almost like we want there to be a right way. Like if we could just crack the code.
Yes. It's about control, isn't it?
Yes.
When we're dealing with something unknown, we crave that sense of control.
Totally. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets really cool. Even if we completely ignore the whole idea of a vengeful spirit, right?
Oh.
Just the ritual itself, it plays on some seriously real psychology.
Oh, absolutely. Think
Right.
about it. Think about it.
Mm.
Mirrors, darkness, isolation.
Yeah. Classic horror movie stuff.
Exactly. Because they work. They create a sense of unease, of vulnerability. It primes us for that fear response.
It's like we're almost setting ourselves up for a scare, even if nothing's actually there.
Precisely. And then you add in the chanting aspect. You're repeating the name, focusing on it. It creates this almost hypnotic effect.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Which, again, lowers your inhibitions, makes you more susceptible to suggestion.
Like we're putting ourselves in a trance or something.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, you've got all these different ways people see Bloody Mary across cultures.
Yes.
It's not one size fits all, is it?
No, not at all. Like, look at the U.S. versus the U.K. In the U.S., she's often this vengeful ghost, right?
Yeah, it's classic.
But in the U.K., she's often portrayed as a witch.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so different kind of fear.
Different cultural anxieties, different fears, different beliefs that get woven into these stories.
Right, like she reflects back whatever scares us most based on where we come from.
Exactly. Exactly.
So like different flavors of fear based on cultural context.
Exactly. And it gets even more specific than that.
Oh, yeah.
Some interpretations, they focus on Bloody Mary as this, like, specifically female figure.
Okay.
Punishing vanity, punishing those who, like, defy societal norms.
Well, right. Like she's coming after the girl who dares to be too pretty or too independent or something.
Right, exactly.
Wow. When you put it like that, it's kind of messed up.
It reflects these deep-seated anxieties, right? About female power, about female sexuality.
Right. You don't see a lot of male figures getting demonized for being too handsome. You know?
Exactly. It's this very specific fear. And it's not just Bloody Mary. You see it echoed in myths and legends all over the world.
That's true. It's like a universal fear of the powerful woman.
Exactly. Exactly. And then, of course, you've got the versions where she's not the one doling out the punishment, right? She's a grieving mother, driven to madness by the loss of a child.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other level of creepy.
Right. Because it taps into that fear of, like, corrupted innocence. Motherhood twisted into something dark.
Totally. Like, we expect mothers to be nurturing, protective, so the idea of them becoming monstrous, it's just unsettling.
Exactly. And it makes you question everything, right? Like, if this supposedly safe figure can become a source of terror.
Then what does that say about the rest of the world, you know?
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, but all this talk about cultural interpretations, it's got me thinking. Your research also dug up those real-life encounters. People who say they've actually seen or heard something during the ritual. Like, what's your take on that? Is there any chance, even a little one, that these experiences could be, real?
It's a question that's been around forever, right?
Right.
And while I'm always open to exploring the unknown,
Right.
there's often a perfectly good scientific explanation behind these seemingly paranormal events.
Okay, you're gonna have to break this down for me because my brain goes straight to ghosts.
Of course, of course. Remember we talked about the Caputo effect?
Right, right. Something about staring in a mirror too long, like messing with your brain.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yep.
Especially in dim lighting. But it goes deeper than that. You see, our brains, they're wired for facial recognition.
Makes sense.
It's how we connect, how we interpret social cues. But in low light, with limited sensory input, our brain tries to fill in the gaps.
Okay.
And sometimes it fills them in with some pretty freaky stuff.
So you're saying because we're expecting to see a face, especially in the mirror,
Yes,
we're more likely to see something that isn't really there.
precisely. And then you factor in the heightened emotional state of the ritual itself.
Yeah.
You're expecting to be scared. That shadow, that trick of the light, suddenly it becomes Bloody Mary.
Oh, wow. It's like a perfect storm of biology and belief.
Exactly.
Speaking of belief, there are a couple stories from your research that really got to me.
Oh, yeah. Which ones?
There's that one from the UK, the Halloween party.
Oh, right, right. Classic setup.
Very cliche, I know, but still creepy. So they're at this party, right? And they decide to try the Bloody Mary thing.
Okay.
Dimly lit bathroom, obviously. And they're saying the name, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But before they even finish, candle goes out. Poof. Darkness.
And that's when those primal instincts kick in.
Oh, totally. Your senses go haywire.
Our imaginations run wild.
Exactly. So this person, they bolt out of the bathroom, understandably freaked out. But here's the thing. They glance back.
And they see it.
Handprint on the mirror.
Ooh, classic ghostly encounter. What did it look like?
They said it wasn't a normal handprint, more like claw marks, like something had pressed against the other side of the glass.
Ugh, chilling detail.
Right. And get this, they try to clean it off, because maybe it's just like condensation or something.
Right, trying to rationalize it.
Exactly.
Right.
But it won't budge. They even said it was still there days later.
A lingering reminder.
Seriously creepy. Now, I'm not saying I believe in ghosts, but that detail, the handprint that won't go away,
It sticks with you.
it totally does. It makes you wonder,
Of course. Because it's those unanswered questions, that sense of like, what if, that really gets under our skin.
That's the power of these stories, isn't it? They live in that space between what we can explain and what we can't.
Exactly. Our rational minds clashing with that primal fear. And sometimes the fear wins.
Right. But this one, it's like the fear came later.
A slow burn, yeah.
This person, they do the ritual, nothing happens. They go to bed, wake up in the morning, handprint on the mirror.
Like, she decided to make a house call later.
Right. Totally creepy calling card.
What's so unsettling about that is it's like these forces, whatever they are, they don't play by our rules, do they? It's that lack of control, the idea that something could be happening even when we think we're safe.
It's like the fear lingers even when you think it's over.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the history, the psychology, but your research also went in a direction I totally didn't expect.
Yeah.
Technology.
Right, because it's not just about mirrors anymore, is it?
That's what I'm saying. It's our phones now, right? Like, that's our reflection.
Exactly. We're bombarded with images, filters, this pressure to present this perfect version of ourselves.
Yeah, it's like we're crafting our own digital reflections. But are they really us?
That's the question. It's a digital hall of mirrors, and it messes with our perception of ourselves,
Okay, so how does Bloody Mary fit into all of this?
Well, she becomes a symbol, doesn't she, for our anxieties about technology.
Because she's always watching.
Right. It's that fear of losing yourself in technology, of your online persona becoming something separate, something monstrous.
Oh, wow. Like we're scared of becoming ghosts online.
Exactly. Think about it. It's not about seeing a ghostly figure in a mirror anymore. It's about losing your identity in this digital void.
So if Bloody Mary has always been this reflection of our fears, but now it's our digital fears, what does that say about us?
Maybe it's that our fear is becoming more internal. We're not just afraid of what's lurking in the dark, but the darkness within ourselves. The things we hide, the versions of ourselves we create online.
So it's not about getting rid of Bloody Mary. It's about understanding what she represents. Like really looking in that digital mirror and facing those anxieties.
Exactly. That's how we break the spell, right? Not by running from our fears, but by understanding them and figuring out how to exist in this digital world in a way that feels authentic.
It's like that saying, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Exactly. Or, in this case, maybe the only thing we have to fear is a really bad Instagram filter.
Right, because When you get down to it, the scariest monsters are the ones we create in our own heads.
Truth.
So next time you catch your reflection, whether it's in a mirror or on your phone screen, take a second to really look.
Think about what you're reflecting back to the world.
What are you putting out there? What's the reflection telling you about yourself?
Because who knows? Maybe those reflections, they hold the key to understanding not just our fears, but our potential too.
And that, my friends, is something to reflect on. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep exploring those rabbit holes, and remember, sometimes the deepest dives lead to the most amazing discoveries about ourselves. Ever get that feeling? Like some stories, they just get under your skin and they stick with you.
They really do.
They really, really do. And I think for a lot of people, the Candyman, he's one of those stories.
Oh, for sure.
But we're not just talking about the movie monster here, are we?
No, not at all. This goes way deeper than that.
So what is it about this story, this legend, really, that still has such a hold on us?
Well, I think it's the time of year. It's getting darker earlier.
Right. Perfect timing for this deep dive.
Exactly. And those shadows, well, they tend to play tricks on the mind, make it a little more susceptible to a good scare, you know.
Okay, so maybe before we go any further, for anyone who maybe they haven't seen the movie or they don't know the ins and outs, can you give us a little background on who or what the Candyman is?
Sure. So the Candyman, he's this, well, he's like a boogeyman, right?
Yeah.
This figure who haunts the shadows, and he's been around a lot longer than the movies.
Really? I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. The legend, it goes way back, even before Clive Barker wrote the short story in '85. We're talking like whispers and rumors of this hook-handed figure going back to the 1950s.
Wow, okay, so what, like way before my time?
Probably a little before yours, yeah. And back then it was more about parents using him to keep kids in line. You know, be good or the Candyman will get you, that kind of thing.
Ah, so like that classic fear of the monster under the bed, in the
Right.
closet.
Exactly. Tapping into that primal fear of the dark, the unknown. And it worked. Kept kids in check, at least for a little while.
I can imagine. But it is interesting, though, how that fear, it morphs over time, doesn't it? Like, what we're afraid of today is different from what scared people back then.
Right, and the Candyman, he kind of reflects that, don't you think?
Totally. So how do we go from this, like, shadowy figure in the background to, the Candyman with a name, with a story, with a hook for a hand?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Because that hook, that's not just some random scary detail. That's tapping into something deeper, something almost primal, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, just the image of it, it's unsettling, right?
Right. Because it's not natural. It's a violation. And in a lot of cultures, sharp objects, especially hooks, they're seen as like instruments of punishment, even tools of the supernatural.
It's like this intrusion, something that shouldn't be there.
Exactly. And it's interesting because, think about the 1950s, you've got the Cold War, this fear of the other, of communism creeping in. That hook could almost represent that, couldn't it? Like this unseen threat, this fear of being taken over, controlled.
Right, like being pulled into something you can't control. It's like these very real anxieties found an outlet in this figure of the hook-handed man.
Precisely. But then, things change again when Clive Barker comes onto the scene in the '80s.
Okay, so how does his story take this existing fear, this existing figure, and kind of, reshape it?
Well, he gives the legend a face, a name, Candyman. But more importantly, he gives him a past, a reason for being the way he is. He's not just a monster. He becomes a victim himself.
So there's a tragedy there, a humanity almost.
Exactly. This Candyman, he was a talented artist, a son, and he was brutally murdered, his hand replaced with a hook, all because he dared to love a white woman.
Wow, it's heavy stuff. And suddenly this figure, this monster, he's not so monstrous anymore, is he?
Right. And the setting for all of this, for Barker's story, is Cabrini Green.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, was a real housing project in Chicago.
Yeah. Exactly. And in the '80s and '90s, it was often portrayed as this kind of hotbed of poverty and violence.
So it becomes almost like a character in the story itself.
Absolutely. And by setting the Candyman story there, by tying him to this very real place with its very real struggles, it adds this whole other layer of fear and anxiety, wouldn't you say?
For sure. It makes it real, relatable, even if you've never been anywhere near Cabrini Green.
It makes you wonder, could this happen here?
Exactly. It's not just some made-up story anymore. It feels real, possible.
And that's what makes the Candyman so effective. He taps into those fears, those anxieties we all have about the unknown, about the darkness that might be lurking just beneath the surface.
And it's not just the setting, right? I mean, the way you summon him, it's like equal parts creepy and fascinating, saying his name in a mirror.
Yeah, mirrors, they've always had this, like, weird power, haven't they?
Totally. Like, think about any horror movie. There's always a mirror involved somehow.
Always, because they're unsettling, right? Like, you
Yeah.
look in a mirror, it's you, but it's not you. It's a reflection, a copy. And it makes you wonder, what if there's something else looking back?
Ooh, that's a thought, especially late at night.
Right. And in so many cultures, mirrors are seen as portals, as ways to cross over into other worlds.
Which I guess is exactly what happens with the Candyman. You say his name enough times, he crosses over into our world.
Exactly. He becomes real because you believe he's real. And the fact that it's tied to something so ordinary, so everyday, like a mirror, that makes it even creepier, don't you think?
For sure. It's like saying that the supernatural, it's not out there somewhere. It's right here,
Yeah.
just waiting for the right moment to break through.
And that's what makes those urban legends so powerful. They tap into that fear, that possibility, that maybe, just maybe, there's more to the world than we can see.
Okay, but the ritual itself, like saying someone's name 5 times in a mirror, it's almost like a childish dare, isn't it?
It is. But that's the thing about rituals. Even if it's just a silly dare, there's this power in the repetition, you know? You're actively doing something that's supposed to have a consequence. It's like tempting fate.
You're playing with fire a little bit.
Exactly. And it's that little bit of fear that what if it's true that keeps us coming back for more. I mean, be honest, have you ever said Candyman in a mirror?
Maybe, once or twice. But I was like super quiet about it, just in case.
Right. We all do it.
Yeah.
Because there's that thrill, that little part of us that wants to believe, even if it scares us a little.
It's like we need that fear, like it's a reminder that the world is a much stranger place than we think it is.
And the Candyman, he embodies that strangeness, doesn't he?
Yeah.
That hook, that disfigurement. It's a reminder that things aren't always what they seem.
Yeah, and not just that, but that hook. It's like the symbol of the violence that was inflicted on him.
Exactly. It's not just a scary detail. It's a reminder of his past, of the injustice that created him. It's that violation, that mark of something unnatural that really gets under your skin.
It makes you think about how we as humans were so afraid of being marked, of being changed by something outside of ourselves.
Right, and not just physically marked, but emotionally, psychologically. The Candyman, he represents that fear of being haunted by the past, by the things we try to forget or ignore.
Yeah, and it's not just our own individual pasts either, right? It's like he embodies this collective past, the shadow side of history that we don't always want to look at. Oh, for sure. And it's interesting because, you mentioned this earlier, but he's not just a reflection of any kind of violence, it's specifically racial violence.
Right, and that's crucial to the whole story, isn't it? I mean, the fact that he was murdered for loving a white woman, that speaks volumes about the time period, about the deeply ingrained racism that was still so present.
Yeah, it's like his story is showing us something that was all too real back then and unfortunately still echoes today.
Exactly. The Candyman, he forces us to confront that legacy of racial violence that still haunts us. It's not just a ghost story. It's a story about the ghosts of our past, the injustices that we haven't fully reckoned with.
So we're talking about some pretty heavy stuff here. Like when you really break it down, the story, it's about race, it's about identity, it's about facing the darkness in ourselves and in our history.
And that's the power of these stories, right? They work on these different levels.
Yeah.
On the surface, you've got the scares, the chills, but underneath there's this whole other layer, this exploration of who we are and what we're afraid of.
It's like these urban legends, they hold up a mirror to our own anxieties.
And they change with us too, right? Like the things that scare us today, they might be different from what scared people 50 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But the Candyman, he endures because those core fears, those anxieties about the unknown, about the darkness within ourselves, those are timeless.
So where does that leave us with the Candyman in today's world? Why do you think this story still resonates with people?
I think it's because as long as we fear the other, as long as we shy away from confronting injustice, the Candyman will always be relevant. He reminds us that these issues, they don't just disappear. They linger. They haunt us. And sometimes the only way to deal with them is to shine a light on them, to face them head on.
It's like he's saying we can't just ignore the darkness. We have to acknowledge it if we ever want to move past it.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message,
Uh-huh.
especially this close to Halloween, right?
It's a good reminder that some stories, they're more than just stories. They're reflections of ourselves, of our deepest fears and anxieties.
And sometimes those stories, they have a way of holding up a mirror to our own darkness.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've all earned a good scare. But maybe let's be careful which names we call out in the dark.
You never know who might be listening.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the enduring legend of the Candyman. We'll catch you in the next episode. Catch you in the next episode. All right, so Halloween's right around the corner, and you know what that means. It's time to dive into some seriously creepy stuff. And this year, one ritual that keeps popping up everywhere online is the midnight game. You know, the one where you summon a shadowy figure in your house at midnight?
Yeah, the Midnight Man. It's definitely gotten a lot of traction. I mean, who doesn't love a good spooky story, right? Especially this time of year.
Exactly. So we're doing a deep dive on this one, trying to figure out what makes it so darn scary and why, even when we know it's probably just a bunch of hooey, we still can't help but get sucked in.
Right. Like, logically we know better,
Yeah.
but there's still that little part of us that wonders, what if?
Totally. So for anyone who hasn't heard of the Midnight Game, well, it's basically like this. Picture yourself at midnight. Lights are out, you're standing in front of a wooden door, your only light, a single candle.
Yeah.
And it's not just any candle, right? Because you've just pricked your finger and written your name in blood on a piece of paper.
Okay, hold on just a second. See, even just hearing that, just the setup alone, it's like all those primal fears, right? The darkness, being alone, the blood. It's like we're hardwired to find that creepy.
Right. It's like our brains are already going into overdrive, like something bad is about to happen, and it hasn't even started yet.
Exactly. And then you add in the ritual itself. I mean, knocking on the door 22 times at exactly midnight, calling out to this midnight man,
Yeah.
this entity that may or may not be real. Talk about ramping up the tension.
And don't even get me started on the candle, because if that thing goes out, you've got, what, 10 seconds to relight it? Or else.
And that or else is the real clincher, isn't it? I mean, nobody really knows where this ritual comes from. Some sources say it's like an ancient pagan punishment thing. Others say it's some kind of European test of bravery. But that lack of a clear origin story just makes it even creepier.
Yeah, it's a total head game. Like, some people say the Midnight Man judges your sins, decides if you deserve to be punished. Honestly, I don't know if I buy it, but even just thinking about it gives me the chills.
I know, right? It's that fear of the unknown, of being judged by something we don't understand. And that's what this whole ritual preys on. It puts you in that vulnerable position alone, in the dark, your only protection, a single flickering flame. That's going to trigger anyone's fight or flight response, whether they believe in ghosts or not.
So we've got this spooky ritual that preys on our deepest fears, but what's really interesting is that the Midnight Game doesn't just mess with our minds before and during, but maybe even after it's over.
Oh, yeah, because it's not just about what happens during those few minutes of midnight, right? It's about the stories we tell ourselves about it, even afterwards. Like, think about all those YouTube videos, all those Reddit threads with people sharing their experiences playing the Midnight Game, feeling watched, seeing shadows, hearing weird noises those stories get to you.
Totally. Like, I was just reading this Reddit thread and someone was saying they felt a presence in their house for weeks after playing. Stuff moving around, weird chills, the whole 9 yards. So, is that legit or just their imagination running wild?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It all comes down to psychology, to the power of suggestion. You're already on edge, right? Senses are heightened. Every little creak of the house, every shadow seems like, well, something more. Our brains are hardwired to find patterns, even when there aren't any.
So we're basically primed to jump at every little thing, see a ghost in every corner, even if there's a perfectly normal explanation.
Exactly. So even if the Midnight Man himself isn't real, the fear we experience, that's as real as it gets. And that fear can linger even after the game is over. And think of it, we're talking about a ritual designed to evoke fear, usually performed in the dark, right? Well, darkness. That's naturally when our senses are already on high alert.
It's like a recipe for freaking yourself out.
Right. We're hardwired to be wary of the dark.
Yeah.
It's a survival mechanism, and the Midnight Game, it taps right into that. But then you layer on top of that the fact that it's usually done around Halloween. And, well, that changes things.
Because it's not just another night, it's Halloween. So are you saying the atmosphere of Halloween itself makes this stuff more potent?
100%. Halloween's like giving ourselves permission to engage with that spooky side of life, all the costumes, the decorations, the scary stories. It's like we're inviting those thoughts in.
A collective let's get spooked.
Exactly. But Halloween isn't just about, like, dressing up and eating candy. Some people call it a liminal space, a time when the boundaries between things get blurry, you know? Like between the real world and the spirit world, the line between our fears and reality. It's a time when, even if just for a little while, we allow ourselves to wonder if maybe, just maybe, those things that go bump in the night are real.
And in a liminal space like that, something like the Midnight Game, it's like, well, it's not just a game anymore. It's like we're stepping into the stories we tell, making them feel real just by participating, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like Remember earlier when we were talking about those people on Reddit sharing their stories?
Mm-hmm.
Well, our sources called that ostension,
Mm.
basically. The idea that the more we talk about something, even if it's made up, the more real it becomes, at least in our minds. Like we're breathing life into it with every retelling, every whispered warning, every late-night internet search.
So it's like this weird cycle, right? The midnight game feeds on our fear, and then Halloween rolls around and just throws gasoline on the fire. And on top of that, we can't help but tell these stories even if we don't really believe them, which just makes it all feel even more real.
Exactly. And I think that brings us to why stuff like this, real or not, just keeps fascinating us. It's that thrill of the unknown, that kind of primal urge to push boundaries, to see how much we can freak ourselves out?
Like that part of us that kind of wants to believe, even if it scares us.
Exactly. Especially around Halloween, when those lines get blurry anyway, it's easier to give in to that curiosity, to that desire for a good scare.
Right. Okay, so after all this, where do we even land on the midnight game? Is it just a harmless game, a product of our overactive imaginations? Or is there maybe, I don't know, more to it? Something we can't explain?
That's the question, isn't it? And honestly, it's up to each of us to decide what we believe. But here's the thing, I think. Whether you believe in ghosts and monsters or not, the power of belief itself, well, that's undeniable. It can totally shape our experiences, change how we see the world, and, yeah, even scare the living daylights out of us.
No doubt about that. I know I'm definitely going to be a little more aware of every shadow in my house tonight. But it's also kind of, I don't know, kind of cool, right? The power of our own minds to create those feelings.
Absolutely. It reminds us that even in this world where everything's supposed to be explained by science, there's still room for a little mystery, a little wonder,
Yeah.
and yeah, maybe even a healthy dose of fear now and then.
Well said. Well, as we head into Halloween, maybe this has given you a few things to think about. Whether you're brave enough to try the midnight game yourself, we definitely don't recommend that. Or you'd rather just stick to a scary movie marathon, just remember, sometimes the line between what's real and what we believe, well, it's a whole lot thinner than we think.
And sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we create ourselves.
Ooh, good one to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the midnight game. Sleep tight, everyone. And hey, maybe leave the lights on tonight, just in case, right?
All right, everybody, get ready, because we're diving into the legend of the Jersey Devil today. You guys asked for it, so we're delivering, especially with Halloween, right around the corner. I mean, centuries of sightings, an absolutely insane origin story, and people are still claiming they see this thing. It's wild. So why does this legend have such staying power? Let's find out. We're kicking off all the way back in the 1700s with, you guessed it, a woman known as Mother Leeds.
Mother Leeds, yes. Her and her legendary 13th child. That's where this whole Jersey Devil thing gets going.
Okay, so we're one sentence in and it already sounds like a horror movie. Seriously, though, 13th child.
Yeah.
What's the story there?
Well, legend has it that when Mother Leeds found out she was pregnant for the 13th time, she just, I don't know, snapped, I guess. She puts a curse on this unborn child. Like, straight up declares this kid will be a devil.
Whoa, okay.
Ah.
I get that having 12 kids probably wasn't a picnic, but cursing your kid, that's a little intense, don't you think?
It does seem a bit extreme when you put it like that, but that curse is a big part of what makes this whole legend stick. It taps into something primal, you know? The fear of the unknown, of monsters, of something being bad just because it resonates.
I see what you mean. So the curse is like the foundation. But what about this devil baby? What's it look like?
This was no ordinary baby, let me tell you. Legend says the child was born seemingly normal at first, but then, transformation. Leathery wings, hooves, a forked tail, the whole 9 yards. It's a powerful image, and people have been drawing and describing it for centuries based on that.
No kidding, that's pretty vivid. Okay, so we've got the legend's beginning. Where does this whole devilish drama take place?
Ah, yes, the setting is key, isn't it? And you can't talk about the Jersey Devil without mentioning the Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey.
Okay, for those of us who haven't been lucky enough to visit, what are the Pine Barrens like?
Picture this. Over 1 million acres of dense pine forest. Marshes, winding sandy roads, you name it. Even today, it's isolated. A little wild. Now, imagine it's the 1700s, you're a settler. That place would have seemed massive, mysterious, maybe even a little threatening.
Wow, so we've got this eerie, unknown landscape. Sounds like the perfect setting for spooky stories. Makes you wonder, did the Jersey Devil legend come about because of the Pine Barrens themselves? I mean, if any place could make you believe in monsters, That sounds like it.
You're definitely onto something. Historically speaking, environments like the Pine Barrens are practically breeding grounds for folklore. And that's not just New Jersey, it's all over the world. When people encounter a place that feels vast, unknown, a little dangerous, our brains come up with stories. It's a way to rationalize our fear, you know?
Totally. It's
Yeah.
like those campfire stories. They're way scarier in the dark woods. The setting just adds this whole other layer.
Yeah, it's like the place itself can get under your skin, and then the stories, well, they just grow from there. And with the Jersey Devil, it's not just the setting. People have been claiming to see this thing for ages.
Okay, so how many sightings are we talking? Like a few whispers here and there, or are we talking like hold the front page kind of sightings?
There have been reports for centuries, yeah. But there was a period in the early 1900s when things really took off, especially in 1909.
1909. That does ring a bell. Why was that such a big year for our buddy the devil?
It was Jersey Devil mania back then, let me tell you. Newspapers all over, not just in Jersey, were publishing stories, sightings everywhere. People said they saw it flying over houses, leaving tracks in the snow.
Hold on, tracks in the snow. Wasn't there a huge blizzard that hit the East Coast in January of 1909? So people were seeing this thing in broad daylight during a blizzard.
That's what they said. And it wasn't just some random folks either. Police, firefighters, even well-respected people in different towns were reporting encounters. I mean, even the Philadelphia Inquirer and the New York Times picked up the story.
Wow. Okay, so this wasn't just campfire stories anymore. This was like Jersey Devil takes the East Coast level stuff. Do we have any good details from these sightings? Any juicy accounts?
There is one. A group of hunters in the Pine Barrens. They swore they had the Jersey Devil cornered.
Okay, I am so in. What happened with the hunters?
So the story goes, they got this thing dead to rights, aimed their rifles, and nothing. Bullets seem to have no effect, and poof, the creature vanishes into thin air. Or, I guess, thin trees.
Get that out of here. Talk about an adrenaline rush. It's like proof that there are things out there we just can't explain.
And that's exactly what makes these stories so good. The unexplainable, can't prove it, can't disprove it, just keeps that mystery alive.
Right. You know, we can't talk about the Jersey Devil without mentioning the obvious. Halloween. It's perfect. The timing, the whole vibe. Feels like this thing was made for spooky season.
Yeah, like it was made for Halloween. And it's not just the spooky vibes. Think about it. You've got all these sightings, and they seem to spike in the fall. When the days are getting shorter, nights are longer.
Okay, so we're talking prime spooky season atmosphere. When you'd rather be inside with a warm drink than traipsing around in the woods, right?
Exactly. Your mind's already ready for a good ghost story. Then you add in the Jersey Devil, this monstrous, winged creature born from a curse. Hits all the right notes, doesn't it? The darkness, the unknown, things that go bump in the night. It's all there.
Totally. Like it was designed in a lab to freak people out. But, okay, let's get real for a second. Is there any chance there's an actual creature behind all this?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like with any legend worth its salt, there are a few different takes we can look at. The most straightforward explanation, misidentification.
Like people are seeing an owl and thinking, monster.
Well, yeah, kinda. Even though the Pine Barrens feel really remote, there's still wildlife there, plenty of it.
Yeah.
Some people think that what people are seeing, especially when it's getting dark out, or they just get a quick look, it could be a big bird, like a heron or an owl, yeah.
You know what? Owls can be pretty creepy, especially those big horned owls.
Right. And imagine you're just walking along and you see one out of the corner of your eye. Fall evening, lights fading, could totally freak you out. Or even just other animals that get mistaken. A fox with mange, a deer with something off about its antlers.
Okay, so maybe not a devil, but still enough to make you jump a mile. I have a feeling it goes deeper than just some mistaken identity, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, you hit it. There's a much bigger idea at play here, storytelling. Humans have been telling stories to make sense of the world pretty much forever. And a lot of times, those stories, the folklore, the legends, they pop up to help us understand the things we can't, especially things that scare us or we just don't get.
Totally. It's like when we were kids making up stories about what was under the bed or whatever.
Right. Exactly. Our brains want answers, especially for things that don't seem to have an easy explanation. And for people living back in the 1700s, the Pine Barrens must have felt huge and dark and dangerous. A story like the Jersey Devil, well, that might have made it a little easier to handle, gave them a way to make sense of things they didn't understand, make it feel a little less out of control.
That makes sense. So maybe it's not so much about whether there's really a winged creature out there, but more about the need to explain the unknown.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And here's what's really interesting to me. We try to explain it, debunk it, whatever, but New Jersey Devil stories, sightings, they keep popping up even now.
Seriously. You'd think by now, with everyone having a camera in their pocket, we'd know for sure. But I guess some legends just refuse to die.
It really does feel like that, and I think that says something about how much we love a good mystery. Even now, there's something about it. This idea that some things are just unexplainable, even in our world where we have an explanation for everything, and I kind of love that.
Me too. So for our listener who requested this deep dive, what should they take away from all this Jersey Devil business?
I think it's a great reminder that what we believe matters, and whether you think the Jersey Devil is out there watching us right now or you're totally skeptical, these stories, these legends, they're more than just scary stories, right? They're telling us about ourselves in a way, about how we relate to the world around us and how we make sense of things, especially the things we don't understand.
Well said. I don't know about you, but after this little deep dive, I might need to take a trip to the Pine Barrens myself, do a little spooky season exploring.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, if you do, maybe pack an extra flashlight, all right? Never know what might be lurking out there.
You got it. All right, everybody, that's it for us. Stay curious out there. Stay curious out there.